Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Security Journal America's Leaders in Security podcast series. I'm your host, Victoria Hanscomb, and I'm the editor of Security Journal Americas. Today, my conversation is with Patrik Pettersson, Senior Manager, Future Business and Strategic Initiatives at Axis Communications, and Erik Yunag, Executive Vice President, Products and Services at Convergint. So thank you so much for joining me today, Patrik and Erik. Before we get into our discussion, it would be great to hear a little bit more about yourselves and your background. So Patrik, let's start with you.
Sure. I'm with Axis Communications. I've been with Axis for almost 20 years now. I've done many different things here. I started as an account manager in the field, moved my way up to business development, particularly in retail. I've done engineering in the field. That took me to business, like I said, business development, and then started what we call a technology infrastructure program. Is related to our infrastructure partners like storage, hardware, cabling, and those types of alliances for Axis. Moved on to professional services, and today working with our strategic initiatives would include our new cloud technology platforms.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Patrik, and great to have you here today. So Erik, what about yourself?
Yeah, good morning, Victoria. Nice to be here. So I've spent my entire career in the security integration business, nearly 25 years. The first 17 years of that was with my own company that I sold to Convergint in 2016, so almost 8 years ago. Over the course of that 8 years, much like Patrik, I've done a lot of different things for Convergint, mergers and acquisitions and marketing and internal technology and innovation and external technology partnerships. And so most recently, my role is Executive Vice President of Products and Services, which is really helping us bring together really a combined approach to our partner ecosystem and the services that Convergint provides around the world.
Fantastic. Well, let's get into it then. So today we're going to be talking about cloud-based systems and how they can benefit the security industry. But before we get really into that aspect, how do we define the cloud? It's a word that is used a lot, but what does it actually mean and how is it used in security? So Erik, do you want to start us off on that one?
Sure. We get this question a lot these days from customers, and I typically try to describe this as just saying, cloud is an architecture. And I think most applicably in the security industry, that means the most to us because we've had basically the same architecture for a long time, largely client server applications. And, now the idea of having hosted applications in the cloud that can be scaled and managed in a, global environment connected to intelligent edge devices really changes the way that we can bring unique and creative solutions to customers. So to me, it's all about that architecture and the flexibility and connectivity that comes with different types of connectivity to devices on scaled global applications.
I think flexibility, that's probably a word that's going to come up quite a lot today. But Patrik, did you have anything to add to that?
No, I echo pretty much what Erik says here. I think cloud is an interesting term. You always get asked to define what it is. I think most of us by now in 2024 know what cloud means in one way or another. I mean, the way we use our personal devices and the way we use our day-to-day work. And what it means for security, I think is interesting because to Erik's point, we're a business that protects people's lives and assets. And the criticality of that makes reluctance to adopt new and risky technologies makes us slow to transition, and that's understandingly so. But I think we're at a verge now. We're at a cusp where connectivity is expected, and I think you can do so much with it that you can really define as an end user, an integrator, or as a manufacturer how you want to approach it. And I think I'm interested to talk about some of the things that how we're viewing things.
Patrik, the one thing I would add to that too is that I think the a lot of the perceptions that people have had over the years about cloud and security has really been tied to the fact that it wasn't a lot of cloud applications early in IT that was device heavy on premise. That the idea that sort of our personal lives have been transformed by automation and smart home devices and connected devices in physical space really is what has changed, I think, people's perception in the last few years about, how cloud really can transform an enterprise connected space type architecture that exists in the security world. So I think that's been one of those big tipping points about what does cloud mean to us. I think for the less informed, technology people in our industry, that's definitely been a piece of that has attributed to that tipping point where there's a lot more acceptance to cloud architecture in the security industry.
I would agree.
Yeah, I'd really like to delve into then what kind of systems can be migrated to cloud-based and then their use within security. Obviously, there's a lot of benefits there, but what are the actual technologies that we're seeing move to the cloud now? Patrik, do you want to start us off on that one?
Sure. I think the perspective is maybe a little bit different from how a manufacturer perceives this from the integrator who's responsible for deploying it safely and what they need to the end user, how they want to use it. If I take this from a manufacturer perspective, I think it's the responsibility and continued responsibility for the devices that makes cloud so important for us. Keeping these systems updated. There's new stakeholders within end users that we're facing every single day that are getting more and more involved in the type of technology that's being deployed. So I think the device to cloud or device on premise or the hybrid nature of combining either way in this layered approach to cloud deployments is putting some responsibility on us as manufacturers. We want to have as much as we can and are allowed a digital relationship down to the device because we want to solicit information out of that device to keep improving performance and stability. I know people are reluctant about quote unquote anonymous data, but it is so very important for us to make a stable operating system in a device, for instance. Down to keeping the device cyber secure, of course. So I think when I think cloud, as a manufacturer, I want to make sure that my devices are as updated, as stable, and are performing and secure as possible out there.
Absolutely. I think those are some of the basic considerations for everyone in the security industry. So, Eric, did you have anything to add to that point about the kind of systems or processes?
Yeah, from an integrator's point of view, when you say what kind of systems can be cloud-based, I think we just see this across the board on all types of systems. It really isn't, I don't think, a type of system that we deploy now that there isn't an option somewhere to have a more dynamic cloud-connected architecture. I mean, you've seen this, first and foremost, really largely in the video space. The ideas that Patrik was just describing, are certainly places that have been transformative for video surveillance applications, particularly, widely distributed, large number of sites. These kind of things really pioneered, a move to cloud in the video space. But access control, you've seen a big move to access control in the cloud in the last 5 years, even intrusion systems. I think the things that have really shown the tipping point of the industry are probably the more traditional types of systems like fire detection and mass notification and credentials, where you're seeing more and more manufacturers move to cloud type architectures or have cloud connectivity options on their more traditional panel type architectures, if you will. So, in our portfolio of solution partners, and we see just options across the board, across all different system types, across all different disciplines inside of security, fire, and life safety that are moving to the cloud. So I think back to points that we've all made earlier, we really are at a tipping point now where there are options for cloud connected architectures in almost every space. I think the things that I would observe in the last few years is that being said, there's certainly levels of enterprise maturity in each of those areas, and some areas are not as mature as others. And I think that's our job as the integrator, right, is to help bring options to our customers and help them understand where those applications exist that can deliver the outcomes that are required in the customer environments.
Right. I would say probably the first thing that's probably going to drive acceptance of cloud is mainly around the maintenance of the systems and assurance that the systems are online. But I think what we often fall back on to talk immediately is how do I use these devices, including video, in the cloud to store my evidence and data? But you don't always have to take it to that extension to be quote unquote cloud enabled, right? You can be cloud enabled just from making sure your system is online and that it's updated, that it's maintained, that you have control of your assets and your inventory and those types of things. And then like the maintenance layer, and then the application or operational layer, which is the video in the cloud or the data into the cloud. That's the next step. It's funny because Axis as a company, our devices have always been IP enabled since day one in the security space, which means we've always been able to be cloud enabled. It's just that we didn't always build the manufacturer platforms or solutions to facilitate that aggregation of devices or videos. That's, I think, is what's accelerating. But nobody's been prohibited by moving our camera to the cloud. It's been IP enabled, or our speaker to the cloud, or our radar to the cloud, or our access control to the cloud. I mean, all that has been enabled fundamentally because we're an open manufacturer, right? So cloud, as I would say, that's changing now is that we are standing up capabilities to enable partners in a new way, whereas the devices natively have always been enabled to move. But I think the journey is really being defined here by the readiness of the end user. That's, I can offer all the tools in the world, and Eric can have all the skills in the world to deploy it and implement it. But what's the readiness of that user and that organization? What's their maturity level to move to connected systems, right? And it's going to vary, like I said, versus is it asset management and device lifecycle, or is it actual operational capabilities and seeing video or doing things to do an investigation, for instance, in the cloud? I think that's a maturity journey that only the end user can define, and we need to be able to capable to serve that.
Yeah, definitely. But I suppose that's what you're there for, Patrik, is to help those end users in their journey and to guide them along the way. So for an end user that might be unsure about migrating to the cloud, or only just starting that journey, what would you say to them about the cloud, the advantages that it might be able to bring, or what maybe considerations that they should take into account? So for example, what about cost or flexibility, as we mentioned earlier?
Certainly, I appreciate that. And I think, the way Patrik defines that, we work closely together a lot in these type of applications. So we see a huge demand for customers, I think, for the desire for interoperability. I think one, the ability to more easily connect the data from their systems about their physical spaces to other systems in their environment. So I think that's probably the number one thing that we hear a lot is the interoperability. And what that really means is kind of accelerating their access to the data about their physical space, and then the automation and processes that they can drive with that information. So that to me is a recurring theme across so many different systems, across vertical market customer types. We just hear it all the time because our customers and our, the technology stakeholders inside of our customers all are beginning to extract new value in other areas of their business, or have been extracting value from other areas of their business by having that cloud connected architecture, by having that interoperability and driving access to data and automation and speed and insights in other areas of their operational areas of their business with these types of systems. So I think there's very much a muscle memory with most of our customer environments that is saying, look, we have cloud connected applications that are driving more efficiency and better business outcomes in other areas of the business. This has to be possible in security as well. So I think, the cherry on top of all of that is just everybody's quest for enabling AI and machine learning outcomes. They know that they can't get to those, I'll say, hyperscale type outcomes unless they have a new architecture where all those things are possible. So I think those are the macro themes that everybody, it sounds like hyperbole when you say everybody, but it really is a persistent and consistent series of data points from just really all over our customer base that is causing people to really not just consider, but lean into what are the roadmaps for deployment in the next 1, 3, 5 years that will allow us to put in a series of technologies and architectures that fundamentally enables a different set of capabilities for our organization in the coming years. I think that to me is how I would encapsulate it. And I'll punt it back to Patrik and allow you to fill in some of the gaps around that.
No, I think we're hearing the same things. I would say that there's no question there's an interest in data points. But if I stay, I almost want to divide the topic, talk about what we see in security and traditional security applications, and then all these new adjacent domains that are starting to get asked for access to the cameras, because that's an interesting evolution. I think in the last couple of years that accelerated, particularly with all this buzz around an AI capabilities, and that almost requires connectivity in some ways. So if I stay in the security domain, I think in order for me as a manufacturer to enable Eric to succeed with his discussions, I have to do a few things. First off, I need to offer very packaged and powerful tools that are really good at managing the devices and the hardware that I sell, right? But I also have to keep in mind is how do I make them open enough in a secure way to be integrated in any way that Eric or that end user wants to use my product. So I could choose to go with a completely encapsulated end-to-end solutions where I'm fully in control as a manufacturer, and you have to use my software with my device, my analytics, and that's it. But that doesn't meet the maturity level perhaps where the end user is, or that doesn't meet the use case that Eric is presented with. So I have to walk a fine line here between offering the fully defined, packetized product, and I also have to open myself with secure and scalable ways to offer interoperability with my devices for those third-party applications. So I think the way I see it is when I'm in front of an end user, they usually present you with a very simple use case. But the moment they then begin engaging with other stakeholders in our organization, be it IT or other operational functions of that organization, and they want access to video or manage those devices, I have to find ways to serve that. And I have to do it as easy as possible in a scalable way for Eric, because he has hundreds and thousands of installers that have to be familiar with this technology, right, out in the field to do it on a day-to-day basis. So I guess for my long sentence, a long-winded answer, I have to do a very dual approach here as a manufacturing partner to both the end user and Eric, and that is as many packaged and well-defined products as possible at the same time as I create openness and interoperability to third-party platforms. And then we can go into data and other uses for cameras down the line, but essentially that's my perspective.
Fantastic. So obviously, there's a lot of conversation around on-premise versus cloud, but sometimes a hybrid solution kind of pops up and the conversation goes that way. So when might a hybrid solution be best, and what kind of applications can that be used for?
Yeah, I'll maybe dovetail into what Patrik was just saying and say, I don't think we don't have a prescription for, sort of hybrid versus pure cloud versus on-premise. I think it goes back to what Patrik was describing, which is the use cases that are emerging. I think it really depends on the things when you think about premise-based or cloud-based solutions or some hybrid. It's really just some amalgamation of storage, compute, bandwidth, and latency, right? Like there's some matrix that you're figuring out of those really four variables, but really what you're looking at there is in the context of the use case you're trying to enable. So I think that to me is really the answer to the question. What we have today is really the ability to deploy solutions in any number of different hybrid scenarios. Well, maybe pure cloud is best for reasons of latency and compute close to access to resources in the cloud, or Vice versa, there you may want to deploy, a premise-based application where storage or, bandwidth is limited, those kind of things. But I think it goes back to what Patrik was saying about, really understanding what these new emerging use cases and capabilities are, and having the flexibility to deploy in any of those different circumstances, depending on either the customer environment or the use case, or, the emerging business stakeholders trying to do something completely different from a traditional security perspective. One of the things that I hear often from customers, or I try to counsel them about when I get pulled into, I'll say, innovation kind of conversations or digital transformation or modernization conversations, is to stop thinking about investments or roadmaps for, video surveillance as video surveillance, but more about enabling a visual intelligence infrastructure that your entire business can leverage for different purposes. Clearly, you want to deliver the core security use case, and continue to bring new capabilities and flexibility and, insights and everything else to delivering and limiting risk in the security function. But if you just pause for a second as a customer and zoom out and say, really look around and say, what are other areas that we may want to have a visual intelligence capability for, whether it's, customer experience or manufacturing or operations or safety or whatever, there's innumerable ways that you can think about using visual data to drive decision-making and insights. I think stepping back and pausing on that exercise really does help customers ground themselves on, how might they think about investments? Where might they want to enable capabilities? Before you just say, well, this is one more iteration of the video surveillance solution. This really is a huge inflection point in technology for the world that, visual intelligence is an incredibly powerful new capability that organizations can look at, really bringing that data into their traditional BI or business intelligence decision-making framework to really bring new value to the organization. So to me, I don't think the hybrid versus cloud architecture is really where we start. Lots of different options in there. I think that's the beauty of today is we've got tons of options. Patrik and his organization brings it so many different ways for us to integrate and deploy, and with applications and storage and everything else. It really goes back to the customer centric thinking around how do you want to really enable modernization in your enterprise.
Right. I would jump on that and say the hybrid journey is, again, a maturity level of the end user. It's how comfortable are they with beginning to open up and expectations of opening up the system for the values and benefits that we proclaim with cloud connectivity. And it's all about listening. And if the customer is in an environment where connectivity is not an option for varying reasons, legislation, mandate, corporate policy, physical limitations of bandwidth, remote locations, and those things, we need to be able to do an on-prem solution. There's no question. And if the system is agile enough, and there's some accepted tolerances around putting it into the cloud, these are tolerances around latency primarily or costs. We can certainly do it in cloud. And then there is somebody that wants a little bit in between. And I would package up a maturity journey of a customer in four major categories. A is what's their expectation of availability, meaning insights, assurance, and awareness, and aggregation of that data. For instance, if they're a multi-site facility, how much information do they want at their fingertips to understand the state of that system, right? Because one can argue that it's super secure if you have an air-gapped system. Well, it is, but you have no idea what state it's in. So it's air-gapped, and if there was a human error or even malicious activity or a hardware failure, and it was truly air-gapped, how would you know? You'd have to go in and look at that system at regular intervals physically to make sure that it was operational, right? So there's the availability and aggregation. That's one of the buckets. The next one is the cost model. How are you financed for your system? Are you more of a CapEx or an OpEx type of organization? Do you want to rather pay for things as a service, or would you like to own the hardware because you want to depreciate it over time. So there's the cost modeling of choice here when you decide to what degree of hybrid you would want, right? And when we say hybrid, we mean either device directly to cloud, we're talking device to an appliance of sort on-prem, or we're talking about device on-prem with cloud enhancements or other things. That's really what we're talking in a hybrid model. Eric already touched what's your tolerance for latency and requirements for speed, right? Are you comfortable with things going somewhere and then you getting access to it? And that is also a latency factor. And then the last one is about security. How safe do you feel with your information somewhere else? There's so many different layered approaches to cybersecurity. That's a topic in itself. But those are the four buckets I see: availability and aggregation, cost model that fits for you, patience and tolerance for speed and latency, and then also the security layers. I do want to start bridging into a lot of what Eric is saying about the other use cases. The other thing that's starting to accelerate the willingness to adopt cloud now is the advanced capabilities that various cloud platforms allow when we present it with data. I don't want to say video because video is a given, but there's so much more like metadata, spatial data, telemetry data. There's all kinds of data that our cameras and devices and sensors in general generate. And you now have, like I said, adjacent domains that also want video or video data to do things with. And a lot of these are in trial phases or in pseudo rollouts, and they start scaling through the cloud. Because if you want that infrastructure to solve those types of use cases more hybrid, like on-prem, that's a significant cost now. So I think that people test out a lot of new, very powerful applications for a few set of devices through cloud connectivity. But that's not where it ends up scaling in the end. That becomes too expensive. And then when they see value in that result, business efficiency application perhaps, or other computer vision type applications, then after a few devices validating the use case, they tend to look at what does it cost to bring that more on-prem for this processing of AI and those types of things. So I try to approach this answer through a security perspective first, but there's no question that I think Eric and I sense, we talk about this often, how customers are now asking for the data out of their systems for other purposes and reasons. And we're being challenged to help them solve use cases that we did not really think of 5, 6, 10 years ago. And that it's both exciting and challenging at the same time.
And Patrik, I think this sounds a little bit this self-serving for both of us. But I think the reason this conversation is really important for us to have with end users and customers is particularly our traditional security stakeholders inside of organizations. The more they understand that they can be an enabler for a broader set of capabilities for an organization. This has never been the case, right? We've always sort of just been cost centers for an organization, largely reducing risk for organizations. Yes, this means more business for the integrator, and yes, it means selling more cameras and those kind of things. But what it helps them do is broaden access to budgets, right? On where else might we go to help rationalize bigger investments in, video infrastructure as an example that could be used in other areas.
I think that's, one of the key points there is just the wealth of opportunity that, these kind of systems can offer, because it's not just about the security itself. It's about the wider business, and then also about that other huge amount of data that organizations can get from that, and then the various benefits that they can see. So I think that's, really one of the key points there. So for anyone that might not be quite so familiar, appreciate, as you said earlier, Patrik, pretty much as everyone has heard of the cloud. At this point, it's, not exactly a brand new thing, but I think there are still some misconceptions out there. So I do want to cover that and what you'd like to correct some of the industry about?
I think it's going to come down to cybersecurity. I think a lot of people, the first concern they have is my data siloed just for me, or can other people get access to my data? And two things: the data can be extremely protected, well secured today, and there's technologies that you'd have to deploy to do that. There's best practices in how you implement who has access to that data, right? I mean, I don't think there's a single person today that doesn't have some kind of two-factor authentication on the phone. And that might be what's considered a safe way today, but maybe not tomorrow. It becomes something else. Who thought of QR codes or entering authenticator codes was going to be a thing, right? And yet here we are. So I think security is a concern, and I think with a proper strategy and good guidance by your integrator, you can deploy a system very safely, and you're going to have to work with your IT teams to do that. So I think it's that, and then trust the vendor. What reputation does the hardware manufacturer and vendor have that you're selecting in this domain, right? Like I said, we would love to have a digital relationship all the way down to the device on behalf of the customer and on behalf of our system integrator, in order to make sure that we're always constantly, regularly securing that device with the latest little micro updates. But that is going to take convincing somebody that it's safe to do so. So I think the conception is that this is not safe, is what I'll start with. I'm sure we'll come up with others as me and Eric talk, but I'll bounce it back to Eric.
Yeah, I mean, I think the misconceptions, you're exactly right, Patrik. I mean, it starts with, you hear it's not secure in terms of the whole platform, right? Which I think is a complete misconception. Most of the most, important applications in the world now run in the cloud, right? Banking and finance and federal government and all these, that's just, I think, a generically inaccurate misconception. Now, each, partner is different. You hear not secure, you hear someone has access to my data, right? Not on a security breach front, but just somebody else has access to my data. And those are ways to manage that. And then it's not ready, like enterprise wise. It's not, the cloud isn't ready for my environment, my particular vertical or my scale of my organization. Those are the three things the misconceptions I hear the most. And look, all misconceptions are grounded in some historic reality, probably, like different points in time. Certainly cloud applications have not been as secure, or the data has been, harder to protect, or, they haven't been able to scale to enterprise levels. But I mean, those are three things that largely I would put in the misconception bucket at this point, that there are so many ways with technology and different partnerships that you can, ensure that you have really good outcomes in those areas.
I would say another one is, when people say my IT department won't allow me to do that, I think what that really comes down to is a look in the mirror to say, do I really know what I'm asking for? Do I have the skill to have a smart conversation with my IT team? And if not, then bring us, the manufacturer or your system integrator, with you, because we've been forced to deal with this for a very, very long time. I'm saying that the practitioners that use the security system have so much to worry about, and now they have to become cloud experts. I don't blame them for not having invested themselves in, how do I secure my system? They maybe think, oh my God, this would be so much easier if I could see all my 45 locations in one thing, but I don't even know what to ask for. I don't know where to start. We can be good allies in that, but I would say IT in the company is an ally in that. Ask them to help. So I think
Patrick, that's a. I didn't mean to interrupt you. I think it's just a fantastic point, because I think that misconception that my IT department is pervasive, like they won't allow it, or that what they're really saying is that I don't know to have that conversation. And the reality is, in the vast majority of circumstances that I've seen, not the opposite of that is true. The IT department doesn't want to support a server in a rack, because they're down to a handful of things, right, that are premise based. They want to get out of the business of managing servers and devices, and they're much more comfortable managing a cloud application in terms of their core normalized IT security strategies than they are doing premise-based devices many times. So it's a great point. I mean, that misconception about IT being a blocker for cloud applications, I think, is largely, a relic of the past. And that if you really had a frank and open and deliberate conversation with IT, with your stakeholders like your manufacturing partners and integrators, you quickly come to the conclusion that they would advocate for solutions that are based in the cloud.
I want to pick your brains about what you think we'll be seeing in the next few years, maybe in the slightly longer term. I think, Eric, you mentioned something a bit earlier about what you see in the future. So, if you could delve a bit deeper into that, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, I think the most obvious low-hanging fruit there is just the intelligence. It sounds cliche to say AI.
I agree.
Is going to, change, but we are just literally in the first inning of what that's going to mean for security, and life safety applications. When you really start to bring, insights to the data and computer vision and all these other things, and we are just uniquely positioned to benefit from that. When I say we, I mean the security industry. We have been sitting on such enormous amounts of unused, uncorrelated data for so many years.
That's the key word, Eric, data.
It is, and we have so much of it that is just unutilized, right? We surface events, all the time, useful or unuseful, but what might we learn and what insights might we gather, right? When you really begin to bring, AI and machine learning to bear for use cases inside with that data, again, I think this is the cloud architectures usher in that possibility. I think you can't decouple those two things in my mind. Nobody's installing a Chat GPT server in their house to run, a Chat GPT conversation. Maybe I'm doing it wrong. I don't know. I'm not sure.
July 2024. Come on, Eric.
Yeah, exactly. So, but I think when you just think about the inevitability of AI, the inevitability of the value that's going to be created there, it's ushered in by an architecture that obviously embraces a version of cloud connected devices and being able to orchestrate those machine learning models and those kind of things. Right. I think another thing that I believe is going to be coming too is really, I'll say, micro features. When you move to a cloud architecture, a lot of the security industry is used to having kind of version releases of software that, I'm, customer, I got version 7.0, and then I'm going to wait a year and I'm going to get 8.0 or whatever that is. And it's going to be a whole pile of features that are available to everybody. I think, when you think about cloud solutions, a lot of times there are certain features you can turn on individually, in real time that are maybe specific to a use case or specific to a vertical that I might want to try and turn on and then turn off again, or, that I'm not just waiting for huge releases in long time increments. That if I have a specific use case or I'm in a specific type of compliance situation, those kind of things, that I'll be able to see, the term I use, micro features, right? That I just have accessible to me in a much more real-time kind of a way. I think that's another thing that we'll see that our industry hasn't been used to. And I've spent my whole life in this industry. You sort of wait for the new shrink wrap piece of software to show up, on a 1 year increment, and you install the new version or download it now, right? And install it. And then maybe there's a whole bunch of features you never wanted or used, and you're sort of paying for those. And I think moving more towards that consumer type experience that most cloud applications are very much leveraging now, that I can turn on what's important to me in a much more real time way. I think that's going to be really important. I think the third thing is just, again, a theme we've touched on, which is just that interconnectivity to other systems. I think there's going to be a much more normalized way. Our industry has long suffered from proprietary data silos and connectors that are not sustainable. And I think as you move to cloud, you're going to see a far more normalized way for us to interact with the rest of the technology world, right? In terms of exchange of data and automation and all those things and identities and all that's going to come from a new set of architecture. So those are three kind of big themes that I think are going to really help transform outcomes for our customers.
I love when you bring up this modular concept of software where you or even how you use your devices. If you compare it to a technology which is consumer driven, I know, but it's a model nonetheless that is interesting. That's our cell phones, right? Our cell phones are basically a platform to run whatever you want to run on, and it does a few core competencies very, very well. It connects a good network to 5G, 4G, Wi-Fi, so it has connectivity, right? It's a connectivity device. It has a display. It has the camera. It does the voice. It has the speaker. But the rest of it is really you define how you want to use your cell phone and what apps you install on the cell phone. So one can argue, would you like to buy a $3,000 iPhone or Android that comes fully loaded with features of many of which you won't use, or would you like to buy one for a third or a quarter of that price, and then you pick what apps you want on it? And that's something that we struggle with when we look at our roadmaps and our products. Like, how much features do I pump into a camera that are what ifs for all the customers, or do I do the core competency capabilities and then allow people to modularize the device? Well, one makes it easy for Eric. If I sell every single device the same way, then Eric's technicians can train up fully on all those devices. But if I make it modularized all of a sudden, then the skill sets from the installation and system design perspective has to scale exponentially, because customization versus standardized is a different support model, I guess, in a skill level, I suppose. But I see that trend. I see a trend where we don't pump everything into every single device anymore, and it allows people to kind of augment the device the way that they want to. I think it's a clear trend. When I touch on the data, oh my God, I just had to pipe in when you said it. Data is really where this is going in the future. And I think there's 4 aspects to data: structured and unstructured data and orchestrated data. We have to do a really good job as a manufacturer to categorize the data, initial filtering, so they can go to applications to be highly efficient. Metadata is an interesting term that gets thrown around there a lot. But if I just describe metadata for a second, imagine having a radio in your car where you hear every single radio channel at the same time. Country music, rock music, hip hop, talk channel, it doesn't matter what, it all comes at you at the same time through the speaker. You would drive you nuts. You like to use your tuner and you like to tune in to the channel that you want to listen to. Well, if I say my device gives metadata, I'm giving you all those channels, all that information, and it's for you to filter out, that data to use what you want. What I need to do is give you the channels. I need to give you the radio stations of compartmentalized, orchestrated, and structured data, so that the next person in line building applications or customizing the system can choose color of shirt, color of pants, height, speed, direction. I need to compartmentalize data, right? So data is going to be key. And then the other question that comes up is it data in transit or data at rest? Meaning, if it's in transit, that means it constantly gets lost. If you're not harnessing and storing that data, it gets lost. So you need like almost immediate processing of that data. But data at rest means we're sending it somewhere to be stored for it to be analyzed later with some sort of latency. So all these questions are going to start popping up. And now we're talking very futuristic. But I think it's going to do one thing. Manufacturers that can very, in an efficient way, structure the data coming out of their devices is going to be the winner and the choice of anybody, because they're going to want a well-integrated device.
I think we've kind of covered what people in the industry should consider about cloud-based systems. So what I want to ask is if there's one thing that you'd like the listeners to this podcast to know, what would that be? So one key takeaway. So Patrik, why don't you start us off with that?
Wow. Yeah, we threw a lot at people here. I think it's get comfortable. Depending on what size organization you are, we can have all kinds of listeners here who are a singular entity owner to somebody who's mid-sized, multi-branches, to others who have full-staffed IT department in an enterprise scale. I would say begin thinking of how you would use cloud, and maybe the beginning part for you is just maintaining your systems and bringing them into an asset management baseline capability. Meaning, ask yourself when you're buying the system, if I have a couple of locations, or if I'm sitting at home with my one location, can I see the state of the system? Can I be assured that things are running and up and running? Maybe that's your first entry level step into adopting cloud enablement. I think I would start with that. Begin, and if you are in a larger organization and you've been uncomfortable going into the IT department, then use us as partners to bring you in there and help you carry that conversation, because we think you'll get a far warmer reception than what you might be sitting there thinking right now.
Fantastic. Thank you. So, Eric, what about yourself? There's one key takeaway.
I would just challenge and encourage, the security practitioners inside of customer organizations to engage other people in their organizations, to look outside of their walls for input. I think the vast majority of customers that we see have, transformation initiatives in place. When you go talk to those people and you ask them, what could you do with this information about connected spaces, visual or audio or data or presence information? They've got really good ideas. So I think it's really opens up your eyes to what, the potential and possibilities are. And you'll find yourself with a lot more advocates than you will adversaries when you do that.
It's been an absolute pleasure. And also thank you to our listeners for tuning in to this Security Journal America's Leaders in Security podcast. I've been your host, Victoria Hanscomb. Make sure to keep an eye out for our next episode coming soon.